What's up everybody? In this issue of Motive Garage, our GTR's engine goes... Now, before we start talking about our engine failure, I know you're going to say it, the stock engine lasted 6 years. Why did a built engine break so quickly? Well, when you play with modified cars, these things just happen. Now, when you have an engine failure, the most important thing is don't go off and just build another one. You actually need to stop, take a look at the data, inspect the engine, and find out why you broke it. Because if you find out why you broke it, you can find out what else is wrong with your car and what you need to do in the future to prevent it from happening again. Now, if you saw our last episode, you know that this engine was a little bit of a slap together. It was a second-hand engine where we found out that it had aftermarket forged pistons in it, so we threw some rods and bearings in it, and off we went. It didn't go to a machine shop, it didn't get balanced, and we weren't aware of the condition of the pistons or if there was any existing defects in the block or the pistons. So really, we were already gambling a little bit with the engine that we put together. Now, once it was running, we were meant to go race it, but we couldn't because we hadn't got the car tech, but we did take it to power cruise and we did drive it around for a couple of months. Even on low power, it was making, over 650 horsepower on low boost, and we did probably about 1,000 Ks of driving on it with no problems whatsoever. In fact, the failure was very much out of nowhere. It was being driven on the highway, accelerated onto an on-ramp, pulled a couple of gears, and literally, it just let go. No warning, no misfire. It didn't fall over or lose power before it broke. It didn't have that fluffy exhaust note that you hear when the cars start to cough, splutter, and misfire before they explode. Didn't have any of that. It was completely clean run, no warning lights, and just let go. Heard that terrible rot out the block sound, saw the smoke out the exhaust, pulled over. Luckily, the car wasn't on fire, but I did have a fire extinguisher. And we knew we had a dead engine. This was just before I went to America for power cruise, so I was gone for a while before I had the chance to come back and look at the car. I pulled the head off at our shop to take a look, and what I found wasn't very nice. We knew we had a hole in the block, but when we looked inside the engine, cylinder number 3 has basically, just torn the block and itself to pieces. Half of the sleeve is actually missing out of the block. There's a giant window in the side of the block, and the piston and rod were no longer inside the engine. They had exited onto the road. In fact, all that was left is the base of that rod with the bearing and the rod bolt still attached, and the rest of it gone. Looking inside your engine and seeing into the water galleries is a pretty scary thing. So it did a pretty big mess on the engine. So I saw that, but on the flip side, I had a look at everything else, and at first visual inspection with the head off, every other piston looked perfect, every other bore still looked perfect. There was no indication that there was any type of problem with the tune because all of the pistons looked really good. We also checked the spark plugs and they all looked perfect as well. So the initial inspection was, okay, just number 3 has failed, the rest of the engine seems to be fine. The first thing you need to do when you want to start assessing what went wrong is to look at any data that you have. Now, our Howtech logging dash has some data in it, probably didn't have as much as we would like, but looking at that data, it did exactly what we thought, or what I thought when I was driving it, and that was nothing wrong, broken. So there was no warning in advance of why the engine broke, it just broke. So that if we can't get anything out of the data electronically to see what may have happened to the engine, we now need to start looking at mechanical components and doing some research to find out why it broke. And then, like I said, every other piston looks fine. So you've got to say to yourself, okay, well, why did number 3 let go? And when you think about it logically, there's 2 main reasons. One of them is a fuel injector in just number 3 broke, let go, and therefore had a lean out in just that cylinder. But we're thinking that's unlikely due to the air-fuel ratio on the data looking fine, and also the fact that the spark plug on number 3 is still perfectly fine. But we are going to send the injectors away to get checked, see what they look like, get them back, and then we'll find out if that was an issue. So for now, we're going to presume that the injectors are fine, and we know that the tune was fine and the data's fine, so we need to start pulling the engine apart a little bit further just to take a look and see if there's any other clues of why it might have broke. Let's do it. Now, having a look from the bottom bottom here, what I can see is some debris has moved around inside the engine. There's a lot of pitting marks around number 2. The number 2 rod has some damage to it. A whole lot of pitting and chunks torn out of the crank on number 3. So a lot of material has bounced up around inside, well, at the bottom of the engine. So yeah, when they let go and rods and bits of piston go everywhere, they do a fair bit of damage. And yeah, it's damaged. Like I said, it's pitted and torn chunks out of the crank, and well, that's out of control. Wow. That's hectic. Did we spin a bearing? No. No. So we've pulled the engine down to take a look at what may have happened during our engine failure. Now the first thing to look at is the bearing, because as you know, if you spin a bearing, you get enough heat in the bottom of the rod, you can break a rod. So there's what's left of our rod and piston number 3, but if you take a closer look, it is definitely not spun a bearing. So the bearing is definitely not the culprit for why it failed. We went and pulled all of the other rods and pistons out as well to take a look, and as you can see, they're all in pretty good condition tune-wise. There's nothing wrong with the tune. You can see there's nothing around the skirt showing any detonation. Some of them do have a little bit of damage underneath, but that was just from metal bouncing around from number 3 into the other cylinders. But it appears that all the other bearings are perfectly fine. The top of the pistons, the crown, the rings, etc. are all perfectly fine on the other pistons, so we know it's not tune, it's just a mechanical failure. What we did find though is a couple of the pistons actually had a little bit of play in the gudgeon. Con tested that, had a bit of a look, and there was a bit of play in the gudgeon. Now we did some more investigating about the pistons we have in here, and the reason we're not going to name names is purely due to the fact that these pistons are no longer in production. But after talking to the manufacturer and one of their salesmen and engineers, what we did find out is this type of piston quite a while ago used to be made in 2 different grades of metal. Now, basically a low grade and a high grade. Obviously the high grade is designed for big horsepower, big boost, and the low grade was just designed for a sort of normal rebuild. Now when they made their product range, what they did for each engine is they gave each engine both options. And when it comes to RB26, you don't really want a low power option because the factory stuff can handle, 800 engine horsepower or more. You've got to make sure that the upgraded piston can handle quite a lot of power. They asked me how much power we're making, how much boost. I said 35 pound, we're making, over 900 engine horsepower, and they've blatantly said that older design piston just won't handle it. What you'll find is the area around the gudgeon will fail, and the loose sort of play of the gudgeons and some of the other pistons is telling us that that is most likely the cause of what failed. So a piston has had the gudgeon area break away. Obviously when it broke away, it just disintegrated. It took the sleeve with it, it broke the rod, and everything went out the side, and it was done. So essentially, we've narrowed down that just an inferior product could just be worn out from being second-hand. We've just had a product that wasn't up to the job, and it has failed in number 3, and if it didn't fail, one of the others was going to fail. So really the big question is, what do we do now? Well, we haven't finished with our 2.6 development, so the guys at CID and Nitto have basically gone, we've got a spare block here with a 2.6 crank and a set of Nitto rods and pistons in it. Let's put that back together. But before we do, we're going to send that block off to Platinum to get a girdle put in to strengthen the block, because as we know, on the power levels that we're at, we're probably going to crack a block again, so we're going to try and prevent that first. So that's what went wrong. You know our plan. Let's get to it. Now when you blow an engine, that damage can actually work its way out of the engine and into the accessories. One thing that can be damaged when you blow an engine is the turbocharger. Now we were pretty smart, not lucky, because we fitted one of these inline oil filters to our oil feed line to the turbo. And basically this saved our engine. Now we sent the turbo off to the guys from GCG Turbochargers just in case any material did make it into the rear housing, and they pulled everything apart, had a look, and they did say that the oil filter was filled to the brim with metal particles. If we didn't have this inline oil filter on our turbo system, we would have definitely lost our turbo and probably had to buy a new one because we would have damaged all of the bearings and all the centre cartridge. We were lucky though, no material made it into the exhaust housing and did any damage to the turbine wheel, so the turbo got a clean bill of health, and while we're there, we decided to upgrade rear housings. Our old one was this, the 101 rear housing, but we've now decided to go up to a 115 rear housing. Why? Because we want to make some more power. So with that on there, the last thing we're actually going to do is we're about to pull the compressor cover off. We're going to send it away to one of our friends to get the T51R conversion. Now, in case you're wondering what that is, it's one of the few wanky mods I've done to a car because all it does is make the car sound awesome. And we'll show you that next time around, hopefully.